Alex here with a video on the problem of influence. This is going to follow the same style that I use in the problem of media, the problem of money, and the problem of voting. And there may be a fourth video. I can't keep track of all of them in my head. But I get a lot of questions that lead me to cover a topic like this. Nobody ever sends me a question on, hey, what's this issue with influence in court? Usually it has to do with biases. Sometimes it has to do with representing themselves versus an attorney. A lot of times I get specific questions about my family court judges, primarily district court judges Chuck Weller and Bridget Robb. Not so much the Clark County ones because those were right at the end. And I'm going to go ahead and take care of all of this in one video. The first thing I guess I should say before I even start is I kind of covered a manifestation of this problem a long time ago in the video Self-Representation Bias. And I kind of just noticed it. I noticed it was worse than any other bias I'd ever seen in family court, including gender bias, quite a bit worse. And that really, as I'm sitting here right now in 2023 doing this video, I think that is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. That's really the thing that I noticed back then that a lot of people notice, but nobody really understands where that problem originates from. Sometimes I'll hear people just say flippantly that lawyers hate, non-lawyers, lawyers hate pro se litigants, so of course there's going to be a bias against self-representation. I really think that more of the problem comes from who's going to create problems for that judge, and the judge seeing the least likely person to pose a threat to their comfort, and I use that word very intentionally, comfort, is the parent, just a random parent that comes in off the street, whether they have an attorney or not, especially if they don't. They pose the least threat to that judge. If they upset the lawyer, there's many things that the lawyer can do to create problems for that judge. Creating problems doesn't even necessarily mean that they succeed in whatever it is they're trying to do. Creating problems could be just running against the judge on the ballot just to annoy them with no chance of winning, but now forcing the judge to expend money and time in fending off an election challenge. I talk about that in, I think, the problem of voting, I'm not sure. But creating problems for a judge is one of the biggest things that I think all judges consider, in Nevada at least. And in non-family court situations, there are a lot of different people that can create problems for that judge. It could be it could be a multi-million-dollar corporation. It could be an influence group. It could be, and by that I should say special interest group, especially if it's involving things like banking, other industries, businesses, etc. Of course, the attorneys themselves. And I think that these are unions. There's a lot of very powerful groups that can in fact impact the situation for those judges and cause them discomfort, cause them problems. And I think that it's so much that I think more likely those judges don't even really perceive it. They don't even think about it because they can do something in favor of this person and tick the other person off. They can do something in favor of the other person and tick this person off. So why even think about it? Just do what you're supposed to do and apply the law, render a decision, and come what may. I think that that's the situation with most judges, at least in this state. With family court, I don't think that's the case. With family court, I think there are situations where really it's just one group that they have to worry about, which is the family court lawyers. There's no multi-million-dollar companies that care about how you're divorcing and giving child custody out. They just don't care. There are some rich people that go through family court, and those people can cause the judge a problem in the form of appeals. Maybe if it's an extraordinarily wealthy person, in the form of an election challenge. And I think when that happens, it's very rare. And I think when it does, the judges do consider it. And there's probably more of a likelihood that the judge is going to apply the law correctly in that particular case. But I think overwhelmingly, that's not what they're dealing with. They're dealing with extremely poor people or middle-class people who can't afford attorneys, not the extortionate rates that they're available at. And I think that in that situation, most of the time, the judges get into the habit of coming to the consideration of, how do I not upset this particular group, which is family court lawyers, so that they don't bother me? And that manifests in the form of self-representation bias. So when you see an attorney representing one side and not the other, it comes out real bad. And it could come out, in other ways. Just off the top of my head, I just thought about the video Meta Rulings. I don't know if you've seen that video. You guys should watch it. It's an old video. In that video, I explained how it seemed to me that sometimes these family court judges were not making rulings based on the facts that were before them, but rather on what conclusion would be achieved by entering that decision. And one of the things that I've seen is a judge wanting to balance out who's winning and losing. So they would basically violate the law to rule in the other person's favor, because that way it wouldn't seem like it was so one-sided. I talk about that in Meta Rulings. One of the things I didn't talk about in Meta Rulings that I wish I did was, I think they do that to attorneys. I'm convinced that they do that to attorneys, where an attorney will come in who's just been losing for the past couple of weeks, and they need to throw that attorney a bone. And so they're like, okay, well, I'm going to have to find something for them to win on. I'm going to violate the law to do that, but who cares? It's more important that I show this attorney that they do win sometimes in my court. And so that's a meta ruling issue where they're making decisions that aren't based on the facts and law at all. And that's both of those issues that I just described are problems of influence, because they're not thinking about, how do I render the correct decision? They're thinking about, how do I make things seem less unfair to this particular attorney who could cause me problems? So that's really what I think, in the sense of influence causing issues in family court more so than anywhere else, is because there's one group with a disproportionate amount of influence. And over time, it's created this culture in family court of, how do we appease this one very powerful group that can cause us discomfort, and not so much, how do we do what's best for the child? It kind of, in a sort of way also, this video kind of also touches on what I talk about in the best interest of the parents. And mainly I say that because I just use the word discomfort. And the issue that I talk about in best interest of the parent is the court trying to placate both parents so they stop filing stuff, because that's starting to annoy them with too much work. I think I also talk about that in end of filings is not end of abuse. It's funny, I started this video thinking it was just one video that is a manifestation of the problem of influence, but now I've already identified 4. So I think that back then I could tell there was a problem, but I didn't know where it was coming from. And so I was doing videos that were discussing the manifestations of this problem. And at no point until now, in 2023, have I decided to do the video where I explain where these problems are coming from. What's at the root of the problem in family court? So I think that part of what's making me more aware of this is the whole litigation against the family division in Nevada over conducting their hearings in secret, and not only trying to get physical access to those hearings, but more importantly, camera access. And for me, that just, it's a realization that by bringing in the camera, you bring in the public influence. And if you're bringing in the public influence, that's an influence that will compete with the only other influence that's there, which is divorce lawyers. So creating a situation where there's a competing influence is more likely to bring the family court into the sort of environment or climate that the rest of the legal system has to deal with all the time, that they've been dealing with since forever. So yes, it is weird, I think, for a lot of people to imagine that judges are making decisions that are not correct on purpose because of problems like this. But that's the reality, at least in Nevada. That's for sure the reality here. I mean, there's even articles where lawyers talk about the problem. And this isn't even a family court article, but there's like an LA Times article, something, if you Google something like LA Times in Vegas, they're playing with a judicial stacked deck or something like that. And they talk about the problem of juice, is what they call it, juice, which is basically influence in some way or another connected to money, is what they focus on in that video, in that article. And even though that article is not specifically on family court, it does talk about the problem of influence and how it causes judges to do things that they shouldn't do. And the examples that they use in that article are, as far as I can remember, non-family court examples. And those are just, in my opinion, those are just a fraction of what routinely occurs in family court. And I do feel like things are starting to get better in sort of the last 6 months. And that's mainly because of what I perceive to be a shift by the appellate courts to confront this issue. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're not really doing anything. But I do perceive there to be a confrontation by our appellate courts in Nevada, a confrontation by them against the family court judges to bring them into line. And that's just based on my reading of the dispositions that come down from the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. Seems like they finally care. And I think that that isn't going to solve the problem, because there's only really one hammer, I guess if you want to call it a hammer, at their disposal, which is the order reversing. And there's only so much that they can reverse. I mean, I've talked about this in my video filing an appeal and standard of review. There are certain areas where the appellate courts just don't get involved, and they can bang the family court over the head with that hammer for as long as they want, but eventually they're going to have to deal with the problem of discretion, which is something that the appellate courts can't do hardly anything about. If you want to learn more about that, please watch my video on the topic discretion. So I guess this, in a nutshell, covers the problem of influence and why I think that the public influence should be a force to be reckoned with in our democracy, and pretty much every institution that's operating should fear the public. And to allow the family court to operate in secret for so long has created this sort of perverse environment in our court system that's walled off from the rest of the court system. That environment, culture, whatever you want to call it, all these decades later, this is what it's turned into today. Is a situation where the judges are more concerned about who's going to cause them problems than what's actually best for the children. So right at the end of this video, I did promise the people that have messaged me that I would talk a little bit about District Court Judges Chuck Weller and Bridget Robb. Yeah, I mean, it was obvious to me that Judge Chuck Weller made decisions that were very damaging to our son. And it's obvious to me that it wasn't that he wanted to hurt our son. I just think he just didn't consider him at all, especially when it got to the point of the dental neglect. There were a lot of points where it wasn't sure if he was just irritated or not. But when we got to the really bad point where our son he needed, 5 crowns, 2 extractions, total of 7 teeth were severely damaged. And he was in extreme pain, couldn't sleep. Basically, you had to, as a parent, watch your child go through this because the other parent was doing it on purpose. And the allegations were in the documents, and Judge Chuck Weller didn't do anything about it. And the reason why, I think, is not because he's an evil judge. I think that he just didn't care, didn't pay attention, didn't want to see what was going on with their son. What he did care about, what he did pay attention to, was the attorney, which is Catherine Burning, and the fact that I'm filing a bunch of stuff that's annoying him. So he's looking at these 2 things, and he's not paying attention to the actual child and the child's suffering. And that's what caused all of that to happen. I think it's just that, what's the child going to do to him? Our son can't file motions. Our son can't, articulate an argument. He can't do anything to him. Catherine Burning can do stuff to him. She's an attorney. She can talk crap about him behind his back. She can undermine any potential election campaign that comes up. What am I going to do? He perceives me to be a nobody. Just a nobody that just goes to court, that has nothing, that's extremely poor, that's in college, hasn't even have a job yet, a serious job. I had a job, but I wasn't working in a professional capacity like I am now. So he's just paying attention to who is going to cause him the problem and who is causing him problems. He's not going to pay attention to the child. And that's something that's a problem in Clark County too. People talk about that all the time. That's obviously a problem in Clark County. But I think that in Washoe County, it's much worse. It's much, much, much worse. And for everyone who's in Clark County Family Court, think about the perceived biases that you go through. Think about the problems of the influence problem down in Clark County with regards to the attorneys having too much control and power. Take that thought and multiply it by 3 or 4, and that's Washoe County. I mean, it's a nightmarish situation for anyone who doesn't have connections in Washoe County. It just truly is. And Honestly, I can't say that I think my situation would have been the same in Clark County. I do think that Chuck Weller was definitely more obsessed with this issue than other judges, but doesn't necessarily mean that I would not have had to still deal with the problem. I just think that the Clark County judges would have probably been more responsive to it. So I still would have had the problem of, the attorney fees I was about to talk about. The attorney fee issue is even worse in Clark County than it was in Washoe, at least at the time, because Clark County had local rules that amplified the ability of the attorneys to break the financial backs of the parents that they perceived to be problems. Washoe County didn't have those rules, so it was harder for the Washoe County attorney, in this case Catherine Burning, also Oster, to inflict damage, financial damage on my life. In Clark County, it was, and that's probably why Clark County is even as bad as it is. I'm sure that if they deal with the attorney fee problem, the lawyers will lose a lot of their influence. They'll still have a lot of influence, but they'll lose a lot of it. The attorney fee problem, not only is it probably the number one worst problem in family court in this state, but I think that the attorney fee problem is the reason why I'm so able to gauge the problem of influence in the first place. Because the judges have created, or the legislature and the lawyers and judges through promulgation of court rules have created a situation where they have so much discretion and latitude on the award of attorney fees that it really helps expose the problem by watching and seeing how they award attorney fees, the amount of attorney fees that they award, and who they award the attorney fees to. So I don't know if they meant to do this, but whether they meant to do this or not, it's because of the attorney fees that many of us can see who the problem judges are and how bad the problem of influence is. If they were to deal with the problem of attorney fees, it would be a lot more difficult to measure this issue. And that's how I'm able to measure the difference between the judges specifically, individually, and also the difference between the two different districts, Districts 2 and 8. District 2, as far as I can recall, does not have any local rules that allow judges to impose attorney fee awards, whereas the 8th district has at least two that I can think of off the top of my head. One of them is covered in a video called Requirement to Attempt Resolution. So, yes, it is obvious to me that there was a problem with District Court Judge Chuck Weller, and that, I believe, is tied to the problem of influence, which is the point of this video. Now, District Court Judge Bridget Robb was only different in the sense of how serious the issue was. I'm not going to say that she was not making the same mistakes as Weller. I just think that she wasn't making the mistakes as often as Weller, or as bad as Weller was. But I think that there's issues with District Court Judge Bridget Robb as well, because she didn't take the issue seriously either. I mean, the hearing was 9 months after the motion was filed. And the judge who, if I remember correctly, continued the hearing at least once, maybe twice, was Bridget Robb. So here you have a document that's saying that a child is basically living a life of pain and torture through the issue of dental neglect, and an allegation by a parent that the other parent's doing it on purpose. And Judge Bridget Robb didn't drop everything and do a hearing right then and there. She waited. So he had to suffer the full 9 months. So yes, I do want people to understand that I had issues with Judge Chuck Weller, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Judge Bridget Robb was not causing me any issues at all. I just think she was causing me less issues. And I do think that probably the judges in Clark County would have done a better job than Judge Bridget Robb, partially because they have a lot more hearings in Clark. And I think it would have rang alarm bells very quickly at the motion hearing, which is something that they don't do in Washoe County very often. They just set the evidentiary hearing usually. And I don't know if they've changed this, but when I was representing myself, you'd file a motion, and then at the same time you'd do a notice to set. And if I remember correctly, that was the evidentiary hearing. I don't remember them doing a motion hearing first. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't remember that. You can watch my docket series. I published everything. But in Clark County, they always do the motion hearing. If you just put in there that you want a hearing, they give it to you. And I think that they would have realized the problem much more quickly, and they would have done something about it much more quickly in Clark because of that, which is disappointing. You shouldn't have to inundate the litigants with so many hearings to do what you're supposed to do in the first place. But it would have probably happened. I don't mean to sound so negative about what I just made perceive what I just made out to be a perceived solution to my problem. But there's another issue with having hearings anytime somebody asks, and that is the attorney fees skyrocket. So, yeah. It's just, I guess the reality of the situation is that I think a lot of the judges just aren't reading anything. And I've talked about this problem before, and until you're in front of them, talking to them, flapping your gums, they don't know how to separate you out from all of the people who are lying and making up things that aren't true. So I hope that this video makes a lot of sense to you guys. It is, in my opinion, the root of the problem in family court. Sometimes people think it's like we need to vote for better people. Sometimes people think it's like, what's that other thing that I hear a lot about? Education. Which, I mean, I shouldn't be so cynical about that. But I just am, because it's not that they're not educated and they don't know what they're doing. They do know what they're doing. They're doing it on purpose. Yeah, education. It makes me laugh because they're plenty educated. They're plenty educated, and if they want more education, they can get more. No, it's that they are worried about the people who are going to cause them issues more than they are about educating themselves as to what's actually going to help children. And it's this is how I'm going to end this video, because I was wandering into cynicism land. This is how I'm going to end this video. When you hear me say that they don't care, before you just go off and think, oh my God, how terrible, watch my video. I think it's called, let me look it up. I think it's called Cares or something. I came out like, here it is, Caring. Watch my video, Caring, before you go off on that issue, because I describe the situation that creates this problem as well, is why they can't care too much. So just please watch that video, Caring. All right, guys, I think that's all I have for you. If you have any questions, feel free to post them down in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time.